So, I'm a big fan of the cyberpunk genre, and after watching Cyberpunk Edgerunners earlier this year, I was fiending to play a cyberpunk game. Especially since at that point I hadn't bought Cyberpunk 2077. Like a desperate crack addict, I scoured my accounts and subscriptions for anything that might sate my craving. What I found in the depths of gamepass was Citizen Sleeper, a life sim game with interesting tabletop mechanics and great writing, which held back my cyberpunk withdrawals for a few nights. In Citizen Sleeper, your character finds themselves on the Eye, a remote, semi-anarchic ring station after being pulled out of a wrecked spaceship by salvagers. You are a sleeper, an emulation of a copied human mind inside of a cyborg body. Despite your foggy memories, you remember that you somehow escaped and fled from Edgerunners, a corporation who copied and bought the rights to use your mind from the original version of yourself. Since a copied mind is not seen as human by this capitalist dystopia's laws, producing sleepers is a way for megacorporations to have a reliable supply of essentially slave labor. Free for now, you have to find ways to make ends meet living out on the fringes of civilization. But there's a problem. Like a shitty MacBook, your body is designed to fail without the company there to repair you. To discourage sleepers from running away, edgerunners designed their bodies with a built-in dependence on stabilizer drugs. Without them, a sleeper's synthetic organs will slowly be rejected by their body, draining your condition stat and eventually leading to death. Luckily, you can find a way to buy stabilizer, but each succulent hit is going to cost you. You'll need to mingle with the locals, picking up quests and odd jobs to make cash. Over time, you'll unlock new areas of the station and meet new NPCs which offer better opportunities to make money. Sometimes good opportunities for cash or quests can only be unlocked by continually doing a certain task, like picking up extra shifts at a bar, which I thought was a cool way to demonstrate building your reputation with the inhabitants of the Eye with gameplay. The gameplay loop is structured around cycles, or basically days. At the beginning of each new day, you lose a little bit of energy and condition. Energy being basically like a hunger bar. It runs out much faster than condition, but it can easily be refilled with food. But you have to keep it up because if you run out, you'll lose condition at twice the normal rate. And condition is super important, not just because if you run out you'll die, but also because it determines the number of dice you'll roll each day. Every action in the game requires you to spend a die, and the higher the value of that die, the greater the chance of getting a positive outcome or vice versa. But not all actions are equally risky. Working in the salvaging yards and having something fall on you might make you lose condition, but a negative outcome working at a restaurant might just lose you a little money. What I find cool is that low rolls aren't actually that bad because you can use them a lot for hacking. Because sleepers have machine minds, they have the unique ability to see the systems of the station and interact with it in ways that regular humans can't. Not only is hacking used extensively in certain quest chains, but it's also a good way to earn repeatable income by selling data to various factions on the Eye. While using dice for most actions determines the probability of success, hacking actions just require you to have a specific dice number to complete them. And a lot of the simple ones use 1s and 2s. The system is great because you don't feel punished by low rolls, and it makes the RNG less brutal. When you put all these factors together, like the amount of dice you get, the randomness of the rolls, the different risk levels, and the various ways you can actually use your dice, you can see that the system is designed to present you with a ton of choices. And when this works, it really works, adding a sense of fear that you won't be able to make enough money to get your next dose. The issue is that after the first hour or so, the game becomes a lot easier and really loses that sense of urgency. Pretty quickly, I was able to find ways of making money that gave me a good stabilizer buffer, and managing my condition became much more about making sure I had enough dice to do enough questing and other stuff each day. Sometimes it got a little monotonous, just speeding as fast as possible through the motions of each day. I think the devs realized this would happen, and so tried to inject a bit of urgency back by gating a lot of the story progression behind timers. Some of these early ones were actually pretty effective, and I won't mention them for spoilers' sake. But eventually in the late game you can often have 2 or 3 timers going on at once, and I feel like having to work around them sometimes shoehorned me into certain storyline paths, and I didn't really get the chance to at least see what was going on in the others. In some ways this was good, because it reinforced the feeling that my actions had consequences, and since you can't save and reload to optimize the outcome, I had to make the best of what I had and the choices I'd made. But sometimes it just felt like a cheap way to create tension and gate your progress. I'm quickly going to give an example, so if you don't want any spoilers, skip to the timestamp here. Though eventually the company sends a bounty hunter after you, and you're given this big timer counting down until he reaches the station. Now, this did add some sense of dread, but I actually think it would have been more effective if they had just told you that he was hunting you, but didn't give you an exact date that he'd show up. Knowing something bad is going to happen, but not knowing when it's going to happen is way more nerve-wracking than knowing it's going to happen on a certain deadline. Because it essentially concentrates the stress on a certain day, and all the other days before that are safe. I mean, this is just procrastination 101, right? Like, you only focus on the essay the day before. That's the most stressful point. If you're procrastinating right now, you better get back to work. It doesn't ruin the game, but I think it would have been nicer if they had just introduced these things a little bit more naturally. Hey guys, Timter from the editing room here, and while editing this, I realized that this game is pretty fucking boring to watch. I know it's not very high-octane gameplay, but let me know if my edits have been entertaining. If you're still here, thanks, you're a real one, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the video. Before we move on from the gameplay, I want to talk a little bit about skills and classes. There are 5 different skills in the game, and by completing quests, you get points to upgrade them. Each of these skills has different levels from -1 to +2. The levels with numbers modify the dice roll for actions that use that skill. So for example, doing techie stuff is interface. Let's say you have a +1 in interface. For any interface action, that will add +1 onto any dice. So if you use a 5 die, that'll turn into a 6. It'll make it guaranteed. And at levels 3 and 5, you'll unlock the unique perks for each skill. Some are more useful than others, but I'll let you play and figure that out. Generally, I think this system is pretty good, but my main issue is with the classes, which are kind of tied into this. So when you start Citizen Sleeper, you choose between 3 different classes for your character, and they all fit within pretty standard archetypes. You got the Hacker Dude, Repair Dude, and Strong Dude. And based on the interesting flavor text that's given here, you might actually think that this choice matters. But the truth is that these are even more useless than the life paths in Cyberpunk. At least there, they gave you some more dialogue options. Here, all they do is determine the stats you're going to start with. Each class starts with a +1 and a perk on one skill, and a -1 on another. And that's really about it. It's like choosing whether to ask your parents for Pokemon Red or Blue. So your class really only affects the very early game, setting you back in one type of dice check. But after completing just one quest, you'll be able to bring your negative stat back to 0. For most of the game, your gameplay and story experience are going to be almost identical no matter what class you choose. Which is a real shame because a huge incentive for replaying other games often comes from trying out different character builds. While it's not like you couldn't replay Citizen Sleeper and focus on the engage and intuit skills rather than the engineer and interface skills, for example, I just don't find the difference between these perks all that sexy. I mean, I'm not saying that being able to reroll your dice or getting a discount on buying stuff isn't going to affect your gameplay, but it's definitely not as interesting as having to choose between a guns or melee build in a game like Fallout or Cyberpunk. Let's go back to some positives. The graphics for the overworld are pretty simple, but I really like the way that the camera traverses the station. It gives a real sense of place. As a sci-fi nerd, realistic space habitats aren't used enough in media, so I love to see it here. While the visuals for the station are kinda hit or miss, the character sprites are really good. My vocabulary for describing art is shit. Dude, this looks great. Really cool. Awesome. Very artsy. So I'm not gonna sit on this for too long. But I really love the comic book type style that's used here for the character designs. They help give us an idea of what life on the station's really like. Everyone's clothing is very industrial and utilitarian. It's very patchwork, it's dirty, you got tons of pockets to put tools and stuff in. Many of the designs feature coveralls, loosened jackets, or spacesuit gear. Even characters that have really high status in the factions, like Hardin, wear very Spartan outfits, like something you'd see in a factory. Not only does this tell us more about an individual character's job, but it also helps with the world building by showing us just how rough life is out here. It also makes sense that things are very industrial because, like I said before, this is out on the fringes of human civilization, and economies on the periphery tend to be more extraction focused, more resource based, and focused on providing cheap labor, such as in manufacturing. Another cool detail is how the characters who live in the center of the ring are shown as floating in their sprites. Ring habitats like this would create the sensation of gravity on the inner side of the ring by rotating, but the center of the ring, which is the axis of rotation, wouldn't rotate, so people who live there would have to live in zero gravity. I just love how someone put in all the effort to think about how these characters would live their lives and how it would influence their clothing. Okay, so I've talked about the things I like about the gameplay and the visuals, but I think the thing that will keep most people playing through their first playthrough at least is the writing. When talking about writing, I want to make a distinction that I don't think a lot of people will make, especially if you're looking at Steam reviews. People say that the writing in this game is good, but writing can encompass a whole variety of things. When it comes to the plot, I think it's good, just nothing really amazing. It asks some interesting questions about what it means to be human, and made me think about some of the problems that might arise if we were able to copy human minds. But if I'm being honest, I've forgotten most of what happened. I think the reason that most people say the writing in this game is amazing is because the actual prose, the writing on the screen, flows so nicely and is just excellent at crafting the scene in your mind. Let me give you a little taste. As you push the door open, the automatic lights flicker on inside the apartment. They reveal yellowing plastic panels, the curved shapes of wall-mounted utility units, the detritus of a routine life arranged on every surface. You step inside, clicking the door shut behind. The amber light of the aging fixtures glaze everything with a pale orange. The work surfaces hold a variety of objects, indistinct in the dull lighting. A pale blue light drifts from the doorway at the end of the room. I feel like the way things are described is somewhat similar to the way they are in the works of William Gibson, who's one of my favorite authors and pioneered the cyberpunk genre with works like Neuromancer. I don't usually like text-heavy games because when I want to read, I usually just read a book, but just because of the subject matter and the way it was written, I didn't find myself skipping through it too much, and I was actually pretty engaged at some points. Overall, it's a pretty good game, but because of the classes being practically identical, it doesn't have much replay value. I also don't really feel any desire to go back and try to get the different endings. Maybe I'd be more interested if there was a way to reload saves so I could just start halfway through or 2/3 of the way through and get to the alternate endings from there. But seeing as you can't, that means you have to spend another 5 to 7 hours replaying essentially 80% of the content just to see the 20% at the end that's different. At least you can say the game is well paced, because it only really started to feel like it was wearing out its welcome for me towards the end. I had a good time playing it, but I really lost any interest to replay it again. Kind of feels like when you go to a new place with your friends and you have a good time and say that you should come back, but you never do. So if you like visual novels or very text-heavy games, I'd say check Citizen Sleeper out. Otherwise, I'd recommend just getting it on sale or playing it on Game Pass like I did. Like I've said, I've enjoyed my time playing it, but I can't see my broke ass paying full price for it. If you didn't become a sleeper during this video, hit the like button and comment what games you'd like to see me review next down below. Links are in the description if you want to support the channel, and if you want to see more homebrewed gaming content like this, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in 2023.